to have a positive state of mind before they encountered the message itself. The interesting question is, how do you go about cultivating the earth? How do you arrange for people to be in a frame of mind that is conducive to the message that you want to send? It is to recognize, first of all, what is the central element of your message. What is the feature of your message that would make it most wise for people to accept your offer, right? And then you take that dimension and go to the moment before you deliver your message and draw people's attention to that idea, to that dimension. Let me give you an example. There was a study done by an online furniture store. They had furniture that was comfortable. They also had lower end furniture that was attractive because it was inexpensive. Right? They did an experiment. They sent half of the visitors to their site to a background depiction of clouds on the landing page, wallpaper of their site. So the landing page had fluffy clouds on the background. Those people rated comfort as the most important factor in buying a sofa. They spent more time searching for comfort-related information inside the site, and they preferred comfortable furniture to purchase. The other half of the visitors were sent to a site that had as its background wallpaper pennies, coins, money. Right? Those people rated cost as the most important feature for them for purchasing a sofa. They searched for price-related information, and they purchased more inexpensive furniture. They preferred to purchase more inexpensive furniture as a consequence.
Another way you can make a narcissist is that you can diss your child completely. You cannot give them any praise. You know, you don't light up when they come into the room. So that is very hurtful to the child. So they build up this shell of I'm the best in order not to feel the hurt. You have to have genes that predispose you to be a narcissist or a psychopath. But those genes require certain conditions in the environment in order to turn them on.
She'd laid it all out neatly, but within psychiatry, narcissism remains a relatively new, controversial phenomenon.
Pose this question to yourself, because questioning does put you in a certain tension with accepted norms and accepted roles in society. Is it as dangerous as its opposite, not questioning, when so many social forces compete for our loyalties for purposes that don't take into consideration our own personal happiness? The advertisement isn't constructed to make you happy. It is not the purpose of advertisement to do that. It's to make you buy the thing. It doesn't care whether you're happy or not. Right? And that's something to really consider when we look at how many advertisements and how much consumption we're encouraged to engage in to be part of what is promoted as the good life in our media environment.
So this we might call the third law of empathy, that empathy finishes with fine-tuning the balance between self and other, which is necessary in order to understand what other people are doing, and it's also necessary in a social sense, that people can't simply be swamped by the empathic stuff that comes from other people. So again, this part of the brain in the medial prefrontal cortex carries this out. Well, what if this doesn't work so well? What if people don't inhibit their own stuff very well? Well, there's a word for these people, and we call them selfish, literally, which is that their self counts too much in their mind because they are selfish. Or sometimes we call them narcissistic. There are a couple of useful typologies of narcissism that I'll just describe briefly here. You can imagine that one way to have insufficient inhibition of your own self is to have too much self. Like say you have tremendously strong emotions that are too much for this braking mechanism to inhibit. It's just too much stuff. Then you would have a hot narcissism. So people like this tend to be, say, characterologically, artistic people often have a hot narcissism. They're so emotional that they can't rein it in. People who are experiencing intense emotion of any sort tend to be not very empathic, partly because of this mechanism. So someone having a panic attack or someone having a terrible depression, the people are usually not very empathic because their emotions have run away with them. There are people whose emotions run away with them all the time, say, in a narcissism sense, and we might call that a hot narcissism typology.
Many others seem to presuppose it, but did Sam think we were living through a golden age of narcissism?
Is the trend line upwards for narcissists?
I think we're at the tipping point. On the one hand, we will have pathological narcissism, diagnosable, treatable, and on the other hand, we will have socially condoned, accepted, and encouraged type of narcissism, including values such as ambition and drive and ruthlessness and lack of empathy and so on. And these behavior patterns will be rewarded by society. So it will pay to be a narcissist. Crime pays, narcissism pays.
And this is being fanned by social media?
I think it's quite the opposite, actually. I think it was the rising wave of narcissism that led to the development of social media.
Does that scare you or delight you that you may have many thousands more narcissistic brothers and sisters soon?
Narcissists are absolutely the stuff horror movies are made of. They are ominous. They are self-destructive. They are self-defeating. You can't build anything solid on a narcissistic society and collective.
The brain do a lot of things, but one of the things that they do is they kind of help us detect other people's pain. When you damage the empathy networks of your brain, which some people do, they become really impulsive. And you can have people who are really good citizens of the world, right? And if they have this head trauma and little chunks of the frontal lobes are gone, they'll start swearing suddenly, they start yelling at their kids, they feel disconnected. In the neuroscience literature, they call this acquired sociopathy. Through brain trauma, you become a sociopath. And our lab studies find if you give people a little bit of power, they kind of look like those brain trauma patients, right? So we find, like, if I feel powerful, I flirt inappropriately, I am more likely at work to swear and to act in a rude fashion, I'm more likely to gamble, it makes you impulsive. When you feel powerful, you kind of lose touch with other people. You stop attending carefully to what other people think. In our lab, it's come to be known as the Cookie Monster study. We brought 3 people to the lab. We pointed to one person, we said, "You're in charge," right? And so that person kind of felt powerful. And then they had to do this really boring task of, like, write policies for the university. And they're getting kind of bored. We bring a plate of chocolate chip cookies. Everybody takes one cookie. All groups always leave one cookie on the plate because you don't want to be that person that takes the last cookie. So there's that 4th cookie. And we find high-power people, they reach out and take it. And then my grad student, Dan Ward at the time, he came to me and he's like, "I think people are eating differently when they have power." And lo and behold, our high-power person was more likely to eat with their mouth open, lips smacking, crumbs literally like falling onto their sweaters, you know. It's ridiculous.
There's also, you can imagine, another scenario in which your emotions aren't that strong, but your inhibitory control mechanism is weak. And so it's just not up to the task of inhibiting your own stuff. And we might call this a cold kind of narcissism. In adults, when adults have insufficient inhibitory mechanisms, the things they tend to seek out are money, drugs, power, and sex. So that these people aren't inspired, but they are motivated by these other things that they want to acquire. Children are in this category because their inhibitory mechanisms are often not very good. So if you've ever tried to play a board game with a child, say, the kid keeps insisting that it's his turn every time because it's hard to inhibit long enough to let somebody else take their turn. There are also, I think this is not well known enough, so I'll just include this. Everybody knows mostly that when someone says, unabashedly, well, it's all about me, and they act selfishly, that they may have some narcissistic traits. What is less familiar to people is that there's also a person who says, well, it's all about you. I'm really doing this for other people, but they still act selfishly. This also is a kind of narcissism that is probably more insidious and difficult for people to recognize. Nevertheless, it is in the world all over. So when somebody says, oh, I'm just doing this for you, or it's all about other people, or really I'm just helping other people, then you have to look at what it is they're actually doing and whether it benefits the other people or whether it seems to benefit themselves more.
My students and I got really interested in social class. What does it do to the human mind? Our lab and other labs are interested in something called the vagus nerve. It's the longest bundle of nerves in the human nervous system. In our research, compassion, the feeling of caring for someone in need, activates the vagus nerve. Lower class individuals, if we show them images of suffering, they have a vagus nerve response. You don't see that in upper class individuals. It literally is a compassion deficit that's produced by lots of wealth.
Ominous, the stuff horror movies are made of. It's easy to blame the narcissist, but meeting both Sam and the victims had given me a sense of the obvious codependency between the two. The more we crave their strength to balance our weakness, the more we salivate before the bell of their certainty, the more we lock our culture into narcissism's track lines. In an ever more atomized world, that hunger to belong becomes increasingly dangerous. Experts say social media doesn't create more narcissists, but it does give them an arena to flourish. Increasingly, these are the people we're giving the keys to the car, and they could easily drive us all off a cliff. At least the Greek Narcissus only took himself down.
So you can see that what was the central dimension of the message, it could be comfort or it could be cost, could be installed in a customer's mind ahead of time, which caused them to see that dimension as more important, to search for information relative to it, and to act on the basis of a product that gave them that dimension in a prioritized way. It could be cost, it could be clouds. Here was the interesting thing about that study for me. Almost no one recognized that they had been influenced by the background wallpaper. It flew under the radar. That means that this is something that's not only powerful, it's also something that we have to deal with as communicators in an ethical way, because we've got some things that are going to move people in our direction without them even recognizing or taking into account that we're moving them in their direction, in our direction.
I want to close today with something that sort of confirms this. There's a book by Bronnie Ware, and she was a nurse engaged in palliative care for end-of-life patients. And she started to blog, and she started to pay very close attention to what people at the end of their lives were saying were their regrets. And these are the top 5 regrets of the dying, right? Number 1, I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. 2, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. Finally, I wish I had let myself be happier. Right? It's a very interesting list, right? But notice, not a single of those 5 regrets has anything to do with consumption, with wealth, with status, keeping up with the Joneses, or anything like that. I think it's very instructive to think about the top 5 regrets of the dying.
And if you don't know, now you know.